I have broken through the entire world. Not a metaphor, literally. The sky splits open. Ancient ruins crumble to nothing. Sacred sect grounds turn to ash. The geniuses, the elders, the alliance leaders, every one of them on their knees before me. Not one of them dares to look up. They ask me, "Who are you?" I say nothing, because I've almost forgotten myself. I started out as a man who was about to die. 3 months ago, I was lying in a hospital bed. The doctor said I had 3 days left. Stage 4 stomach cancer. The cancer had spread into every bone in my body. Every breath felt like a rusted saw grinding through my ribs. I lay on that pale white bed, shriveled like a mummy left out to dry. I was not afraid to die. Truly. After that much suffering, death almost felt like a mercy. But I was furious. I was 24, never been in love, never seen the northern lights, never even paid off the loan sharks my deadbeat father left behind when he ran. Why did I have to die on this moldy bed? I was staring at a water stain on the ceiling, ready to close my eyes and end this wrecked life, when a mechanical voice, completely flat and emotionless, suddenly rang out inside my skull. Host vital signs detected, near total collapse. Binding conditions met. Shadow split and infinite rewind. System now active. Scanning host status. Scan complete. Beginner reward issued. Initial shadow split slots 1. My eyes snapped open. Was I hallucinating? Was this a death dream? But there it was. Hovering in the gray air in front of me, a translucent panel glowing pale blue. My name written clearly, Dato O. And 2 skills, shadow split, infinite rewind. My cracked lips twitched, my heart slammed awake. The heart monitor alarm spiked with it. System, I called out in my mind, testing. Here, host. What does shadow split do? I bit down against the pain grinding through my bones. I stared at that panel and read. The host may split off a shadow, fully synchronized with the host's ability and consciousness. The shadow enters system-generated dungeons to explore and seize resources. Any enhancement, lifespan, or item the shadow gains inside a dungeon feeds back to the host proportionally. Those words hit my heart like a shot of adrenaline. I could survive. As long as the shadow could bring back lifespan from a dungeon, I would not have to die here. Split. Now. I gave the command without hesitation. As I focused inward, the light in the hospital room seemed to warp. The faint shadow on the white wall beside my bed began to writhe, like boiling tar. It peeled away from the wall, stretching, elongating, until it stood upright before my bed. A solid pitch-black human silhouette. No face, no texture, no detail. Just a pure void cut into the shape of a person. But I knew. It was me. An invisible thread connected our minds. Shadow 1 detected, in position. Open beginner trial dungeon, urban free run. Iron rank, objective survive 10 minutes and reach the endpoint. Reward basic constitution booster 1. Lifespan plus 30 days. 30 days. Enough to keep me alive. Open it, I said through clenched teeth. The next second, the shadow vanished. My vision split in 2. Left eye, the maddening quiet of the hospital room. Right eye, a world I had never seen. A howling gale tore into my ears, sharp and cold the way only high-altitude wind can be. The shadow stood at the edge of a skyscraper hundreds of meters in the air. Below, a jungle of steel and traffic. Ahead, another rooftop, 7 or 8 meters away. Between the 2 buildings, a single rusted rebar. The trial begins. No time to breathe. The rooftop door behind the shadow exploded open. Faceless creatures poured through, snarling, blades in hand. I drove the shadow forward in a full sprint. Wind screamed past. I could feel the burn in the shadow's legs, even the rough grind of concrete under the feet at the edge. Jump. The shadow carved a black arc through the open air, aiming straight for the rebar. But I had overestimated the body's coordination. I had underestimated the wind. The instant the shadow's foot was about to land, a gust hit hard. Crack. The foot slipped. I watched the shadow lose balance mid-air. Fingers clawed at nothing. Weightlessness swallowed my nerves whole. The wind turned into a high-pitched shriek. The ant-sized cars and people below rushed toward me at terrifying speed. A sickening thud. My right eye flooded crimson, then went completely black. The phantom sensation of shattered bones and burst organs slammed through the mental link and hit my brain like a hammer. I gasped. Cold sweat drenched my hospital gown in an instant. Shadow 1 deceased. Trial failed. Dead. Under 10 seconds in. My first shadow had splattered on the ground like nothing. Anyone else would have collapsed into despair right then. But I didn't. I sucked in ragged breaths, listening to the monitor's beeps fade back to faint. And my mouth, it slowly spread into a grin, then a low unhinged laugh. Ha 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 ha. I was not panicking, because I had just realized something beautiful. If I were a healthy, ordinary person, death might terrify me. But I was a terminal patient who couldn't make it to tomorrow. What was death to me? Those 2 words on the system panel were pulsing with pale blue light. Infinite rewind. Death was not the end. It just meant I was wrong. Can't make the jump? Die once. Wind is off? Die again. Cut down by a creature? Die 100 times. 1,000. As long as I could rewind. As long as the shadow could come back every time. I could carve a perfect path through any dungeon with sheer death. System. Rewind. I stared hard at the ceiling. My eyes no longer held the look of a man waiting to die. They burned. Command received. Rewinding timeline. The light in the room warped again. The second hand on the wall clock spun wildly in reverse. The blackness in my right eye dissolved. The skyscraper returned. The howling wind returned. And in that moment I glanced instinctively at the freshly reset shadow standing beside my bed. Pitch black, faceless. It stood still at the head of my bed. I looked at it. It looked at me. And then, on that featureless black outline, the place where a face should have been split open in a thin line, it smiled at me. Silently. A grin that stretched all the way to where the ears would be. A smile with no warmth at all, no eyes, no mouth, just a strange crack torn across the darkness. But I understood. We were the same being. It was exactly like me, the kind of lunatic who would shut their eyes and jump straight into hell just to survive. Go, I said inwardly. The right eye lit back up. The skyscraper, the howling wind, the abyss of steel below, the rooftop door bursting open behind me. Everything reset. Round 2. This time I didn't charge blindly. I locked my gaze on the far rooftop, rapidly calculating distance and wind speed. Jump, half a second earlier this time. The shadow cut through the air. The foot landed solidly on the rebar, but I had underestimated the momentum. The shadow slammed into the far ledge like a cannonball. A nauseating crack. My neck snapped. The view flipped 180 degrees and froze on a gray sky. Shadow 1, deceased. Rewind. I gave the order stone-faced. Round 3. I adjusted the landing point. Touched down successfully, but without a roll. Both legs shattered on impact. A faceless creature leapt from behind. Its blade took off half my skull. Shadow 1 deceased. Rewind. Round 4. A steel pipe hurled by a creature punched through the heart. Round 10. Stepped on moss at the rooftop edge. Fell 300 meters. Round 50. Made it into the stairwell. A mutant hound burst from around the corner and tore out my throat. The system cut 90% of the pain signal to protect my body, but the experience of flesh tearing from bone, organs bursting, that was burned 100% into my visual cortex, into my mind. Any ordinary person after dozens of deaths this brutal would have broken, but I hadn't. My breathing didn't even change. I was like a programmer with no emotions, staring coldly at the death code in my right eye, debugging it over and over. Every death was not an ending, it was a data point. Run 342. Launch point must shift 3 centimeters left to avoid the crosswind between buildings. Run 689. Must roll within 0.2 seconds of landing or a thrown spear goes through the skull. Run 855, the third corner of the stairwell. Must slide along the inner wall to avoid the mutant hound's lunge. Death. Reset. Death. Reset. The wall clock in the hospital room trembled in tiny increments, forward, backward, forward, and in the world of my right eye, rivers of blood. The shadow shattered and rebuilt, shattered and rebuilt. My nerves torn apart again and again, hardened into steel. Run 999. Only 10 meters left to the glowing white exit door, but the shadow's body had nothing left. Legs like concrete. The instant my hand was about to reach the handle, a runaway vehicle smashed through the side wall. It ground the shadow and the door together into nothing. Shadow 1 deceased. Right eye went dark. I slammed my eyes shut on the hospital bed. My chest heaved. The heart monitor screamed. Piercing, maddening. Hours of extreme mental strain and death feedback. My body was on the edge of shock. Warm liquid flooded my nostrils. I didn't need to touch it to know it was blood. Give up. This broken body can't hold. A voice in my mind urging me to stop. I slowly opened my eyes. I raised that skeletal hand, riddled with 4 marks, and clenched the bedsheet as hard as I could. Give up? I had died 1,000 times and felt nothing. I was going to be afraid of living. System. One last rewind. I bit through the tip of my tongue. The pain forced my fading mind awake. Command received. Run 1001. The wind swept my face again. But this time, everything was different. 1,000 brutal deaths had carved every obstacle, every shift of wind, every creature's movement into the shadow's muscle memory. Jump. Wind force. Level 7. The shadow traced a perfect arc through the air, body tilting slightly, riding the wind to land precisely on the strongest point of the rebar. Land. Roll. Rise. Every movement flowed without pause. A blade swung at my skull from behind, hit nothing but air. Sprint. Slide. Wall kick. The shadow moved through the death-riddled towers like a machine tuned to terrifying precision. A mutant hound lunged and missed, smashing through glass. A spear grazed my shoulder and buried itself in the wall. When the runaway car hit the wall and brought it down, the shadow had already used the vehicle's impact as a springboard and completed a mid-air spin at extreme difficulty. Boom. The shadow's palm slammed against the exit door handle. The right eye feed froze. Congratulations, host has cleared Iron Rank Dungeon, Urban Freerun. Calculating completion data, time 1 minute 12 seconds. Completion rating, triple S rank, 0 errors, extreme clear. Ding. Host has broken the dungeon's record. Previous record, 3 minutes 45 seconds. Hidden reward triggered. Lifespan plus 30 days. Basic constitution booster, 1. Auto-injected. Bonus reward, 1 skill point. The moment the system voice went silent, a savage energy detonated from the marrow of my bones, like a cracked and dying desert hit by a torrential downpour. The agony that had been tearing me apart day and night, cancer cells spreading through every bone, receded at impossible speed, like morning fog burned off by the sun. I could feel it clearly, my withered muscles beginning to swell, depleted cells dividing in a frenzy. The weak flat green line on the monitor began surging, beating with the rhythm of a healthy young body. I was alive. Not just alive, I was going to crawl out of hell itself, take back everything owed to me. I pulled the IV needle out of my hand, let the blood drip onto the white sheets, then I fell into a deep, heavy sleep. The soundest sleep I'd had since my diagnosis. The next morning, sunlight cut through the curtain. A shuffle of footsteps outside. Dr. Wang pushed open the door with a group of interns behind him. He was a man in his 50s, used to death. He flipped open the chart in his hand without even glancing at me. His voice carried that practiced trace of pity. Bed 32, Dato. Still no next of kin reached? Last night's readings all dropped below the critical threshold. Prepare the critical condition notice. It's a matter of days. He said it casually and pulled out the latest blood work. drawn routinely while I was unconscious last night. The room was silent, only my calm, steady breathing. Then, Dr. Wang's voice caught in his throat. He shoved the paper up to his face, eyes wide, thick lenses nearly touching the sheet. His hands began to shake. The paper rattled. "Doctor, what's wrong?" An intern noticed something was off and leaned in cautiously for a look. One look. The intern went white as a ghost. Dr. Wang snapped his head up. He stared hard at me propped against the bed, pale still, but with color returning. He looked at the report. Then his face changed for the first time. His voice cracked with shock. "Where did the cancer go?" The room went dead still. The intern's hand jerked. The chart hit the floor with a slap. Dr. Wang stared at the paper. He checked my name and bed number again and again. His eyes were practically bulging. "This is impossible. This cannot be. Yesterday's scan showed extensive shadows everywhere. The organs were already failing. How after one single night is there not a single cancer cell left? Equipment failure? Wrong blood sample?" Dr. Wang muttered to himself, like a true believer whose faith had just caved in. He turned and looked at me as if staring at a corpse that had gotten back up. I ignored their shock. I calmly pushed the covers aside, pulled out the last piece of 4 tubing, bare feet on cold tile. A long mist surge of strength rose from the soles of my feet straight to the top of my skull. No pain, no weakness. My breathing was deep and steady. The basic constitution booster hadn't just cleared the cancer. It had pushed my physical condition past what a normal, healthy person could claim. "Dr. Wang, discharge me." I grabbed the old jacket off the back of the chair. My voice was flat. "Your case is either a medical miracle or a final surge before death. You need to stay for a full biopsy." "I'm out of money." I cut him off. I walked out of the room without looking back. "And I'm in a hurry." Yes, I was very much in a hurry. Back at my tiny, rundown rental, barely more than 10 square meters, I locked the door, pulled the curtains shut, and sealed myself in the dark. I sat cross-legged on the hard plank bed and closed my eyes. My consciousness sank into the pale blue panel. After 1,001 deaths, my mind hadn't broken. It had become clearer than it had ever been. I began to look at Shadow Split and Infinite Rewind with fresh eyes. Most people who received this system would think, "Great, unlimited lives. I can grow slowly inside dungeons." But I wasn't most people. Having crossed the line between life and death, I saw the system's true value, the genuinely terrifying one. It wasn't for survival. It was for total exhaustive search. Like an AI. Why can an AI beat the world's greatest chess players? Because it can play tens of thousands of games against itself in moments. It brute forces its way to a perfect solution through endless failure. And my Shadow, combined with Infinite Rewind, wasn't that a perfect human-shaped simulation engine? The Shadow was not a clone, not a decoy. It was my weapon for exhaustive testing, the code engine I would use to mass-produce perfection. Spend the hidden reward skill point to upgrade Shadow Split. I gave the command coldly. Ding, 1 skill point consumed, Shadow Split cap increased. Current maximum shadow count 3. As the voice faded, the air in front of me warped again. 3 featureless, ink-black silhouettes stood motionless in the narrow room. No breathing, no heartbeat, but we were connected. I knew they were ready to die. Shadow 1, continue extreme agility path. I threw Shadow 1 into the bronze-ranked dungeon, trap labyrinth. My right eye snapped over. Shadow 1 appeared in an underground ruin packed with poison arrows, rolling boulders, and floor spikes. No hesitation. Full sprint forward. 3 seconds in, a poison arrow through the throat. Rewind. 5 seconds, crushed by a boulder. Rewind. 10 seconds, triggered a trap. Floor spikes through the chest. Rewind. I didn't blink. Shadow 1 moved like a tireless assassin, using every brutal death to map the trajectory of every arrow, the weight of every floor tile. Across hundreds and thousands of death resets, Shadow 1's muscles were developing something terrifying, a near precognitive extreme evasion instinct. Shadow 2, go map the arcane path. I threw Shadow 2 into the bronze rank arcane tower, a dungeon saturated with violent magical energy. A normal person entering would need to move carefully, sensing everything through meditation. One wrong move and the magic would destroy you from the inside. But Shadow 2 didn't need to be careful. Shadow 2 grabbed a fire element spellbook directly and forced the magic into the body. Boom, mana collision. Shadow 2 detonated into a cloud of blood. Rewind, second run, change the flow path, whoosh, self-immolation, reduce to ash, rewind, run 30, run 100, run 500. Shadow 2 used the most savage, most brutal method imaginable, a suicide by explosion approach, to navigate the labyrinthine mana circuits, paving the perfect casting path with its own corpses. Shadow 3, take the martial path. I threw Shadow 3 into the bronze rank underground blood arena. The opponent, a 3-meter-tall creature with muscle coiled over every inch of its body, an orc gladiator. Round 1, Shadow 3's skull was caved in by a single punch. Round 2, torn in half. Round 3, spine snapped underfoot. Round 100, Shadow 3 was now avoiding the killing blows and landing a scratch across the orc's face before dying. Round 500, Shadow 3's fist could now find the exact muscle weakness the orc exposed at the moment of attack. Round 1000, Shadow 3 was no longer a punching bag. Through the agony of being slaughtered over and over, it had forged a killing technique. Stripped bare, no wasted movement, nothing but efficiency and death. In the rental room I clenched my jaw tight, drenched in cold sweat. All 3 shadows dying and resetting simultaneously in separate dungeons. The layered phantom pain and torrents of data raged through my mind like a storm. Blood was seeping from the corners of my eyes, but my mouth was spreading into a grin, because I could feel it clearly. Shadow 1's agility, Shadow 2's magic, Shadow 3's strength. Shadow 2's magic and Shadow 3's power were converting into streams of pure, refined energy, flowing back into my body without end. My muscle fibers were hardening to the toughness of steel wire. My nerve response speed was breaking past human limits. Even my fingertips were beginning to crackle with faint sparks. This was incredible. No decades of grinding, just death traded directly for power. It was addictive, still not enough. I could take more. I snapped open my bloodshot eyes, feeling the power surging through me, and licked my cracked lips with pure greed. My mental strength could sustain one more shadow. Spend the dungeon points just earned. Force unlock Shadow 4 slot. Ding. Points deducted. Generating Shadow 4. Just as I was about to send Shadow 4 into a higher tier dungeon to test mental resistance, the pale blue system panel flickered violently. Then the entire panel turned a heart-stopping crimson. The alarm didn't ring in my mind. It detonated in the depths of my soul. Just as I prepared to deploy Shadow 4, a blood-red warning appeared on the panel. Anomalous sample detected. Stellar observation initiated. The crimson text writhed across the panel as if it were alive. A cold, immense pressure, like a higher dimensional being looking down at an insect, drove through my optic nerve straight into my brain. Stellar observation. I narrowed my eyes. A cold laugh. The so-called system. The so-called dungeons. Nothing handed down freely from the sky after all. Someone up there was running a game and I was their lab rat. But the rat had mutated faster than they expected, so they sent an observer. Fine, watch all you want. I wiped the blood from the corner of my eye. Not a trace of reverence in my eyes, only the madness of someone with nothing left to lose. As long as it gave me power, even if a real god stood in front of me, I would bite a piece off. I ignored the blood-red warning and turned my attention back to Shadow 2, deep inside the arcane tower. After 3,000 suicidal mana detonations, Shadow 2 had completely mastered the fundamental logic of fire element magic. No more lengthy incantations. No need for any finely crafted wand. Its body itself had been put through endless explosions and reconstructions, forged into the perfect mana conductor. Shadow 2 exited the arcane tower and entered the silver-ranked dungeon, the Sighing Maze. It was said to have been built by ancient alchemists, a subterranean labyrinth of branching paths, walls of obsidian that devoured magic, and wraiths that were completely immune to physical attacks. Even the world's top transcendent teams entered it walking on glass, inching forward carefully. But Shadow 2 didn't need to inch. Right eye switched. Shadow 2 appeared at the maze entrance. Cold, damp stone walls on every side, the air thick with a rotting stench. Begin. I gave the order cold as ice. Run 1. Shadow 2 walked 10 steps forward and turned right. Dozens of enchanted bolts laced with lethal poison shot from the walls. Shadow 2 became a pincushion. Rewind. Run 50. Shadow 2 avoided the bolts and reached the first fork. Left. Dead end. Right. A hidden gravity trap. Shadow 2 was crushed flat in an instant. Rewind. Run 300. Shadow 2 pushed deeper into the outer maze. First wraith encountered. Shadow 2 formed a fireball. The wraith was completely immune to ordinary flame. It reached back and drained Shadow 2's soul dry. Rewind. Run 1000. Shadow 2 had mapped the wraith's attack patterns. After over 700 deaths, Shadow 2 adjusted the mana frequency and compressed the ordinary fireball into a high-frequency resonance burst. One hit. Wraith deleted. Run 3000. Shadow 2 had memorized every fork, every trap, every creature placement across the first 3 floors, could run through them with its eyes shut. Run 5000. Shadow 2 found a fatal flaw on the 4th floor. The obsidian walls could absorb magic, but their absorption had a fixed ceiling. Exceed that threshold with an instantaneous burst of mana, and the walls would overload and collapse. Run 8000. Shadow 2 stopped moving forward. Instead, it stood still and began compressing every fire element in the surrounding air into its body. Boom. Shadow 2 self-destructed, unable to contain the volume of mana. Rewind. Run 9999. After nearly 10,000 deaths of micro-adjustment, Shadow 2 had finally found the perfect threshold. Run 10,000. I watched through my right eye, a slow curve forming at the corner of my mouth. At the deepest point of the maze, Shadow 2 stood perfectly still. That featureless face radiated something like ultimate detachment and madness combined. It slowly raised both hands. The air around it began to violently distort. The heat was immediate and terrifying, the moisture in the air gone in an instant. The temperature of that cold, dark maze spiked at impossible speed. Red firelight gathered in Shadow 2's palms, then compressed. 1 times 10, 100. This was no longer ordinary fire. It was an intensely unstable energy sphere radiating blinding white light, a miniature sun crammed by force into the underground. Then it released. There was no explosion sound, because at that instantaneous extreme temperature, the very medium that carries sound had been vaporized. All I saw was my right eye flooded with pure white. The obsidian walls of the maze, the moment they touched that light, didn't even melt. They skipped straight to vapor. The wraiths that had terrified countless transcendents never got the chance to scream. Erased entirely. The white light spread outward like a force of absolute annihilation. Floor 1, Floor 2, Floor 3. The entire Sighing Maze, the silver-ranked dungeon that had trapped countless geniuses, was burned through in a single moment. At the same time, in the real world, on the Global Transcendent Forum, a bold red-pinned post detonated what had been a quiet community. The silver-ranked Sighing Maze dungeon is gone. That's insane. Gone. What do you mean gone? Literally gone. The dungeon hall monitors just maxed out. The entire dungeon space was vaporized by an unidentified heat source. Vaporized? That maze is built from magic-absorbing obsidian. Even a top-tier fire element transcendent going all out could maybe blow through one wall. How could the entire dungeon be vaporized? It's real. The dungeon hall footage has been released. See for yourselves. A blurred photo was posted, where the labyrinth had been. Nothing. In its place, a vast crater of impossible depth, its edges crystallized into glass. The world went silent looking at that photo. Every major transcendent organization and faction triggered their highest-level red alert simultaneously. Everyone scrambled to find out who had erased the dungeon. And at the center of that enormous crater, on a stretch of glassified ruins, stood a single broken stone tablet. The only thing the fire had not touched, stained with an unknown energy, scorched into it in charred letters, burned by heat beyond comprehension, was a single sentence. Every person who read it felt their scalp go cold. The gods, merely one person's title. Those words were carved by Shadow 2, with the last trace of mana before detonating. I didn't know if the so-called Stellar Observer would understand the provocation. I didn't care. All I knew was that the moment Shadow 2 vaporized that entire silver-ranked dungeon, a wave of mental power the size of a tsunami crossed the dimensional boundary and flooded into my physical body in the real world. Crack. I sat on the hard plank bed in my rental room, and clearly heard a faint crackle from inside my own skull. My mind had been forcibly expanded. My perception, once narrow, stretched outward without limit. 500 meters. 1,000. I could close my eyes and see a stray cat crouching over a mouse on the street below. This was the mental power of a spell god. I slowly opened my eyes. A dim golden light flickered deep in my pupils, but I had no time to enjoy the sensation of absolute awareness, because in my right eye, Shadow 3's run had reached its most critical moment. Martial Pinnacle. Silver rank. The final proving ground I had chosen for Shadow 3. Unlike the magic-drenched maze, there was nothing supernatural here. Only the most pure physical clash and the art of killing. Shadow 3 now stood on the 9th floor of Martial Pinnacle, the final floor, and standing before it was the dungeon's ultimate guardian, the Warlord. 2 meters tall, muscle like granite, supposedly a creature that had mastered every martial discipline in existence. Run 80421. I watched the right eye feed coldly and gave the command. On screen the fight erupted instantly. The Warlord moved, its speed left after images in the air. Its opening move, a savage full-body ram, so powerful the air broke with a sonic crack. Any martial genius in the world, facing that strike, would instinctively fall back to absorb the force, or use technique to deflect it. Shadow 3 did neither. After more than 8,000 deaths with its organs crushed, Shadow 3 had abandoned every system. No Tai Chi, no 8 extremities, no memorized forms. In its eyes, which were also my eyes, the Warlord's flawless Grandmaster presence had long since been broken down into dry physical datasets. Muscle fiber contraction frequency, ground reaction force from each footfall, breathing rhythm, center of gravity shift angle, left foot driving, center of gravity tilting forward 15 degrees, right shoulder tensing, estimated arrival at 30 centimeters in front of me in 0.2 seconds. I watched the feed. My brain ran like a supercomputer at full capacity. Now, Shadow 3 moved. No defensive stance, no advanced footwork. It simply stepped forward, casually, almost lazily, then raised its right fist and threw an utterly ordinary punch into empty air. No explosive burst of energy, no overflowing force. Just the most common kind of punch a street brawler might throw. And yet, the very next instant, the Warlord's massive body, carrying terrifying momentum, appeared with perfect precision directly in front of Shadow 3's fist, like prey running straight into the barrel of a gun. Thud. A profoundly dull impact detonated across the 9th floor of Martial Pinnacle. Time seemed to freeze. Those eyes, which had never known doubt, showed something for the first time: shock and fear. Shadow 3's seemingly limp fist had landed perfectly, and it hit the only weak point, exposed for just 1/10,000th of a second, when the Warlord's full force was in motion, the Shanshong pressure point, just above the heart, and it was the Warlord's own charging momentum that drove the lethal collision home. Crack. A dense, intricate sound of shattering bone from the Warlord's chest, then the compressed destructive force detonated inside it. This guardian, who had stood at the threshold of the Martial Pinnacle for untold years and broken countless transcendent geniuses, didn't even get to scream. Its entire upper body exploded into a drifting cloud of red mist. One punch. Just one. No flashy technique. No clash of spirit. Only perfect calculation and cold execution. Congratulations, host has cleared silver rank dungeon Martial Pinnacle. Completion rating triple S rank, one-shot kill. Reward issued, lifespan plus 3 years. Hidden reward, true martial essence. Passive, you've seen through the true nature of every technique in the world. As the system chime fell, a surge of energy more savage and burning than anything before slammed into my body through the void channel. My head snapped back. I clenched my jaw with everything I had. I could hear every bone in my body cracking. The muscles that had still been somewhat thin from recovering were now tightening and filling out at a visible rate, packed with explosive power. If Shadow 2 had given me the mental power of a spell god, then Shadow 3 had pushed my physical strength to the level of a human-shaped predator. I sat quietly absorbing the rewards. What I didn't know was this. The moment Shadow 3's punch detonated the Warlord, the brief 10-second completion clip had been automatically captured by the system and posted anonymously on the Abyss Forum's martial arts section, the largest underground platform for transcendence worldwide. At first, nobody noticed the post titled, "Anonymous Challenger Clears Pinnacle Floor 9 with One Punch," until half an hour later, when a verified first-rank martial master clicked on it and posted a comment consisting entirely of exclamation marks. The entire underground martial world erupted. Yungju, headquarters of the Heavenly Martial Sect, an ancient sect built into sheer cliff sides, recognized as one of the world's foremost sacred grounds of martial mastery, Right now, in the sect's innermost elder hall, the atmosphere was suffocating. Over a dozen martial titans, men whose footsteps alone made the outside world tremble, now sat gathered around a massive holographic projection table, staring hard at the footage looping on the screen. In it, a pitch-black, featureless figure facing the warlord's earth-shattering charge. "Slow it down, slower, 100 times speed reduction." The Grand Elder slammed the table. His voice was raw. The footage dropped to extreme slow motion. No one dared breathe. They saw it clearly. The black figure never looked at the warlord's movement. Before the warlord even committed to the strike, the shadow had already taken that step and thrown that punch. The fist hung in empty air. 0.1 seconds later, the warlord ran straight into it and exploded into mist. In the silent conference room, someone swallowed hard. What technique is that? Prediction? Impossible. The warlord's speed and adaptability cannot be predicted. A hot-tempered elder shot to his feet, disbelief written across his face. That shadow had no opening stance. It threw a completely blind punch. How could a blind punch land perfectly on the kill point? It wasn't blind. The sect leader, who had been sitting at the head of the table with his eyes shut, suddenly opened them. He stared hard at the frozen frame. Something unprecedented, raw fear, detonated in those clouded eyes. An elder stared at the replay, fingers trembling. That punch, it looks like it was thrown at the future. The room went so silent it felt like the air had been sucked out. No one could answer the Grand Elder, because to these Grandmasters, the faceless shadow's movements had gone completely beyond the domain of martial arts, and touched something that made their skin crawl. Cause and effect itself. Find it. At any cost. The sect leader stood abruptly. His clouded eyes were shot through with red. Turn the world upside down if you must. Find this person's real identity. If we can bring them in, the sect will command the entire global martial world. And if we cannot, he didn't finish. Everyone understood. If they couldn't, then before this person became a true god, they had to be erased completely. Meanwhile, back in the real world, in my cramped, rundown rental, I sat cross-legged on the bed, using the newly emerged sliver of spell god mental power to slip into the abyss forum without a trace. I watched the bounties skyrocketing across the forum, the wanted notices from every major faction, sect, and special agency flooding every thread. I couldn't help a short, cold laugh. Looking for me? You don't even know if I'm human. How exactly are you going to find me? But it was a useful reminder. Fame brings danger. My body had escaped its death sentence, had even surpassed the physical and mental limits of ordinary humans. But, against the colossal forces that controlled heavy weapons' transcendence, I was still fragile as paper. If they found out that the spell god who burned through the maze and the martial god who pulverized the warlord were both shadows controlled by the same person, they would not hesitate to call in a nuclear strike to erase me. Since you're so desperate to find me, then I'll give you something so massive you won't be able to look at it directly. I rubbed my chin, eyes deepening into something sharp and unhinged. System spend points. Customize a unified disguise appearance for all shadows. Ding. Appearance customization unlocked. Please configure. I sketched the image in my mind at full speed. Moments later, ripples spread across the surfaces of all three shadows, like water. The pure black outlines slowly revealed the deep, wide cloak the color of a starless night, as if it absorbed all light. On the left chest, burned in dark gold, was an ancient emblem, a faceless god, crushing a star in one hand. From today, you are no longer separate. I looked at the three death god figures before me and announced coldly, you are an organization that stands above all laws. Your name is the gods, since I already burned those words into the stone. The gods are merely one person's title. I will make that lie into a truth that shakes the whole world. In the next 2 weeks, I launched a relentless campaign. I needed vast resources to strengthen my body, high-tier transcendent materials to convert into money, and endless trial and death to unlock higher biological limits. So the gods organization made its entrance across every major dungeon and ruin, with a brutality that left no room for doubt. Border Zone, Thunder Ruins, Gold Rank, a 100-person elite military squad was fighting for its life, surrounded by over 10,000 mutant thunderwolves, ammunition nearly gone. Just as the squad leader reached for the micronuclear detonator to die with them, a figure in a midnight cloak, the dark gold emblem on the chest, appeared without warning at the center of the battlefield. No firearms, no weapons, just a ghost strolling through the thick web of lightning strikes, a body shaped by 10,000 rewinds. With eyes shut, every blind spot avoided, like the most elite assassin imaginable, each dagger stroke severing a thunderwolf's artery with surgical precision. 10 minutes later, 10,000 wolf carcasses lay in heaps. The figure stepped onto the wolf king's body, pulled out the invaluable thunder crystal core with bare hands, and didn't spare the stunned military elites a single glance. It simply tossed a metal tag bearing the god's emblem into the blood pool, dissolved into shadow, and vanished. North American Arctic Tundra, Gold Rank, the world's largest resource extraction corporation, had hired 3 S-rank transcendents to hunt the Lord-class creature deep in the tundra, a frost dragon. All 3 S-rank transcendents were frozen solid by a single breath. Just as the dragon moved to claim its kills, space warped. Another midnight-cloaked figure appeared, facing the mountain-sized dragon. It simply raised one hand. No incantation, no spell formation, only pure compressed mana. A miniature artificial sun formed in the palm, radiating terrifying heat, and was casually inserted into the dragon's roaring jaws. Hundreds of kilometers of frozen tundra melted into a boiling ocean in an instant. The dragon didn't even scream. It was incinerated from the inside out. Only a single crystalline dragon pearl remained, falling neatly into the figure's hand. Ancient sword tomb, Gold Rank. Countless sword cultivators had been slaughtering each other outside the tomb for a legendary ancient blade. When they finally broke through the outer seals and charged into the core, they found the midnight-cloaked figure already there, its back to them. No sword, just one fist, which shattered the 10,000 sword formation of the entire tomb. Then it pulled the ancient blade free like pulling a carrot from the ground, force erased the sword's resident spirit, and left. In just 2 weeks, the name the gods spread like an unstoppable plague across every corner of the transcendent world. Assassins, spell users, martial fighters, every faction realized in horror that any random member of this organization was invincible at its rank, capable of one-shotting enemies above its tier. They fought with zero wasted movement, like the most precise killing machines imaginable, and they had no fear of death whatsoever. Once, in a toxic swamp, a gods member needed a rare herb, and used its own body as a stepping stone, enduring acid that could melt bone. Every intelligence agency lost its mind. Nothing, absolutely nothing to find. No DNA traces, no fingerprints, no facial features. They were like data conjured from thin air. Where had the gods come from? Who led them? What did they want? The world's power holders couldn't sleep, terrified of waking one morning to find a faceless cloaked figure standing at the head of their bed. Meanwhile, in the ruins of an S-rank dungeon site that had just been stripped bare, the air still reeked of burned-out mana. The ground was gouged with craters like a meteor strike. A black helicopter bearing the emblem of the top special agency descended slowly to the edge of the wreckage. The door opened. A long, straight leg stepped out. A woman in a black trench coat, a face of extreme cold beauty, hair pulled high, eyes sharp as a freshly honed bayonet. Sylvia, S-rank mental ability transcendent of the special agency, chief investigator known as a living lie detector and the scourge of criminals. She walked in military boots, expressionless, through the devastated ruins. The deeper she went, the tighter her brows drew together. No signs of a fight, she said coldly, her voice like ice shards colliding. Her deputy hesitated, then said, "Commander, look at these craters everywhere." This was a one-sided slaughter. Sylvia crouched down. Her fingers traced the mirror-smooth cut face of a massive stone. Something flickered deep in her eyes. Real wariness. The creatures had no chance to resist, didn't even manage an instinctive struggle before being one-shot. The killer's attack patterns are too perfect to be human, more like a supercomputer that has run tens of millions of calculations. She stood and scanned the ruins carefully. Then her gaze locked on the edge of a dark red pool of blood. A half-melted metal fragment lay there quietly. Sylvia walked over, unbothered by the filth, and picked it up with black-gloved fingers. On the fragment, a faint outline of a faceless god and 2 ancient, arrogant characters carved beneath it. The wind around her seemed to stop. She read them quietly. The gods. Then her pupils contracted, because as an S-rank mental ability transcendent, the instant she touched the ash, she felt a mental backlash like a bottomless black hole. Pure indifference. Like a higher being looking down at insects beneath its feet. No emotion, only absolute cold. "Commander, are you all right?" The deputy noticed her face had gone white. He stepped forward quickly. "Don't touch it." Sylvia shoved the fragment into an insulated evidence bag. She drew a slow breath, forcing down the surge of internal disruption. Coldly, "Report to headquarters immediately. The God's threat classification is upgraded to the highest level, double S, World Extinction Hazard. Notify all other regions to prepare for joint action." Back in the real world, my rental. I sat on the sofa, turning the dragon crystal from the Arctic tundra in my hand. This thing would fetch at least $1 billion on the black market, but I just crushed it between my fingers like a walnut, letting the pure frost magic seep in through every pore. I breathed out a white mist laced with ice crystals. The mana reservoir inside me had expanded again. 1 month since the gods had burst onto the scene. In that month, the world's spiritual energy had hit a sudden surge. Countless ancient ruins and folded spaces erupted across the globe. Corporations, sects, special agencies, underground cartels, every faction threw itself at these world-altering resources like sharks smelling blood. But they found, miserably, they were only picking through the gods' leftovers. Every time an S-rank dungeon opened, a midnight-cloaked figure was already there first. No teams, no negotiation, just one-sided slaughter and looting, then gone with the best treasure. Finally, the powerful couldn't stay seated anymore. I watched the brand-new high-end laptop on my coffee table, its screen streaming a global live press conference. At the center, a man in a sharp suit, eyes cold and calculating, military hawk representative, guest elder of the Heavenly Martial Sect, and the man behind the world's largest transcendent resource conglomerate, Ethan. Both hands braced on the podium, his voice carried across the world. Recently, an illegal transcendent terror organization, calling itself the Gods, has been seizing strategic resources across the globe, slaughtering dungeon creatures and eliminating other explorers. This is a direct challenge to all human order. He paused, his eyes turned deadly. Therefore, on behalf of the Xingyuan Corporation, the Heavenly Martial Sect, and 16 of the world's top transcendent organizations, I formally announce we are forming the God-Slaying Alliance. As of today, a full-scale campaign against the gods begins. Any person providing information on a gods member will receive $100 million. Any person who eliminates a gods member will receive 1 S-rank transcendent artifact. The live-stream comment section detonated. Ethan has lost his mind. Mobilizing 16 top factions against a single organization, that's enough firepower for a third world war. The gods are finished now. No matter how strong, there are only a handful of them. How do you fight the entire world's elite? I looked at Ethan's righteous face on the screen and couldn't help laughing out loud. Come after me? I picked up the cheap instant coffee beside me. You think you're the hunters? Over the next 2 weeks, the God-slaying alliance demonstrated terrifying mobilization. They cast a net across the entire world. Every cutting-edge mana detector, satellite system, and even prophet-class transcendents were deployed, all to find a trace of the gods. I issued the order. Shadows 1, 2, 3, full withdrawal, enter silence. From the outside, it looked like the gods had been frightened into hiding. Mocking voices appeared on the forums. The so-called gods, just bullies who fold when they meet real resistance. When facing actual power, they run. But I just sat in the rental room and watched with cold eyes. I was waiting for them to gather every last card, every last elite in one place. 3 days later, the opening arrived. A top-secret intelligence report exploded onto the Abyss Forum. An unprecedented S-rank Abyss Rift had appeared above the Mariana Trench in international waters, reportedly containing world tree fruit capable of pushing anyone straight to the demigod threshold, along with a massive quantity of ancient divine artifacts. Ethan reacted immediately. He pulled over 70% of the Alliance's top combat power, 5 S-rank Transcendents, 3 Martial Grandmasters, and a fully armed Mana Warfleet, and sent them thundering toward open waters. Above the Mariana Trench, Ethan stood on the flagship's deck, issuing commands with the air of a man who had already won. A massive mana suppression formation blanketed 100 kilometers of ocean in every direction. Inside that formation, even spatial teleportation would be severed. They thought they were going to take resources. I watched the footage Shadow 1 was feeding back through my right eye. A mocking curve at the corner of my mouth. Shadow 1 was submerged in the deep-sea current, silently watching the enormous fleet above. What they didn't know was that the Double S Rift was bait, lured up from the abyss floor after 10,000 death runs of simulation. I closed my eyes. Consciousness split into 3. Shadow 1, prepare to destroy the formation's core. Shadow 2, go to the rift entrance. Prepare to reverse the abyss energy flow. Shadow 3, I paused. My eyes went absolutely cold. Go to the flagship, play with them. Inside the flagship's luxury conference room, Ethan stood before a massive holographic sea chart. Around him sat the leaders and top fighters of every major faction. Ladies and gentlemen, the suppression formation is complete. The moment the gods show themselves, this place becomes their grave. Ethan spread the map on the table with a cold smile. However strong the gods may be, they are still prey. From outside the door came a voice even colder. Are you talking about me? The voice was not loud, carried no trace of transcendent energy, like an ordinary person whispering in your ear. But to the room full of people at the top of the world's power structure, it hit like a thunderclap in a clear sky. Who? Ethan spun. The 3 martial grandmasters beside him erupted. Force energy solidified into blades and tore through the air, blowing the special alloy cabin door into powder. The dust settled. Nothing outside. What just happened? Detectors showing nothing. An S-rank mental transcendent was drenched in sweat. His mental field covered the entire carrier, and he had felt nothing. Just then, the alarm screamed through every ship in the fleet. Commander, reporting. The suppression formation core at 10,000 meters depth has been severed. Reporting, abyss energy at the rift entrance is suddenly destabilized, flowing in reverse toward the surface. Reporting, flagship propulsion system offline. 3 unidentified high-energy signatures on radar. Ethan's face turned iron gray in an instant. He rushed to the porthole and stared hard at the surging sea. The ocean, once blue, had turned churning black. 3 midnight-cloaked figures stood on the surface of the water, as if they had always been there. The gods, someone screamed it in terror. The entire fleet erupted into chaos. Stop panicking! Ethan roared. There are 3 of them. We have thousands. Open fire. Blow them apart. Dozens of mana beams, each capable of erasing an island from the map, poured down onto the 3 figures with annihilating force. But facing that world-ending barrage, the 3 figures didn't move at all. The instant the beams were about to swallow them, a strange black ripple spread across their surfaces. And then, before the eyes of everyone watching in stunned disbelief, the 3 figures that had terrorized the entire world simply ceased to exist. No spatial ripple, no teleportation flash, like an invisible hand had simply erased them from existence. Gone completely. The mana beam slammed into the ocean and raised a tsunami hundreds of meters high. Ethan froze. Every faction leader froze. Every person watching through satellite feeds across the world froze. Did they run? Ethan murmured in disbelief. Of course they didn't run. Real world. That rundown rental room. I sat bare-chested and cross-legged on the hard plank bed. Curtains sealed tight. Not a trace of light inside. Time to end the game, I said quietly. My voice sounded especially rough in the dark. As my words faded, the air in front of me began violently warping. The first to return was Shadow 1, the assassin who had pushed agility and movement to absolute limits through countless parkour runs and kills. The crack on its featureless face seemed to carry a thread of fevered glee. It dissolved into pure black liquid and slammed into my chest. My body shuddered violently. An indescribable sensation of lightness flooded through me. I could feel my bones becoming hollow and impossibly strong, muscle fibers rearranging in ways that defied biology. The air currents around me, the drift of dust, all of it slowed in my perception to something crystal clear. I even had the illusion that if I wanted to, I could step on the air itself and walk up into the clouds. Then, Shadow 2, the spell god who had burned through the maze, crossed the dimensional boundary and descended before me, radiating a suffocating surge of magic. It merged into my forehead without hesitation. I finally couldn't hold back a low roar. My brain felt like a supernova was detonating inside it. Immeasurable mental power and elemental resonance crashed through every single nerve like a tsunami. I could even see the magical elements drifting through the air, colors I had no names for. They moved like subjects catching sight of their king, swirling and leaping around me in frenzied celebration. Then, Shadow 3, the martial force that had annihilated the warlord with a single punch. It walked toward me step by step, radiating a terrifying vitality powerful enough to suppress an entire age. It didn't merge immediately. It stood before me, slowly raised both hands, and performed a deeply ancient martial salute. Then it became a blinding streak of crimson light and drove itself into my heart. A single heartbeat rang through the tiny room like a great iron bell. My body finally couldn't hold the weight of three extreme forces combined. It began to break apart. My skin split inch by inch. Blood erupted like a fountain. My muscles were torn apart by the savage energy, exposing white bone. My organs nearly liquefied under the heat and pressure. An ordinary person would have detonated in the very first instant of the merge. But I didn't die. Because I had the system's lifespan rewards, decades of extra life stacked up inside me, and a will forged unbreakable through countless deaths. I ground my teeth to powder, roaring without sound inside my mind. Against a force that could unmake the world, my body, once riddled by terminal illness, was like scrap iron thrown into a blast furnace. In absolute agony, it was forcibly reforged, flesh reborn, bones rebuilt. A new layer of skin covered my entire body, glowing faintly with dark gold light. Every muscle held enough force to shatter a mountain. Every drop of blood carried destructive magic. I was no longer the shadow puppet master who needed others to fight for me. In this moment, I had become a true god. I don't know how long it lasted. Eventually, the violent energy inside the rental room went quiet. I slowly opened my eyes. Left eye, deep as a black hole. Right eye burning with dark gold light. I stood up. No clothes, just a casual wave of my hand, and a cloak condensed from pure shadow magic draped itself across my shoulders. The faceless god emblem on my left chest pulsed with a light that made the heart clench. I looked up. My gaze seemed to pass straight through the ceiling to the storm-covered sky beyond. The moment the last shadow merged into me and I opened my eyes, the sky above the entire city cracked open at once. The cloud cover over Jeongju was ripped in two by an undetectable, terrifying force. The deep black vacuum of space showed through. Dark red bolts of lightning as thick as barrels tore through the rift. The entire city's gravity collapsed completely. Shattered stone, cars, even stray dogs drifted helplessly into the air. I stood at the window of the rental room and watched it all. Calm. I knew. The trace of energy I'd leaked during the merge had lit up like a searchlight in the dark, broadcasting my exact location to the entire world. Sure enough, under 3 minutes. At the edge of the sky, space buckled violently. The Mana warfleet that had been stationed in the Pacific jumped directly overhead through some enormously expensive large-scale dimensional relay formation. Then from every direction, the heavenly martial sect's 18 golden body elders surged in, riding flying swords, sealing off the southeast. 12 nuclear-powered divine mechs, each 100 meters tall, sealed the northwest. The holy knights raised ancient divine weapons radiating sacred light and sealed every escape. The god-slaying alliance came out in full force. To kill me, they didn't spare a single thought for the tens of millions of civilians in Yeongju. They deployed an ancient killing formation called a 10-direction annihilation array directly around my crumbling apartment building. Found it, the high-energy source is in that building. Ethan's voice blasted from the flagship speakers, twisted with savage excitement. So the leader of the gods has been hiding in the slums all along. Everyone listen up. No capture. Activate maximum firepower. That building. The surrounding blocks. Erase all of it from the map. At his command, the entire sky ignited. Cannons charging. Devastating white light. The sect elders burned their own blood simultaneously, gathering a brilliant sword energy stretching 1,000 meters. The mech's nuclear cores roared deafeningly. 12 micro-antimatter missiles screamed forward on long trails of fire, formation arrays, forbidden weapons, ancient sect heritage, modern military power, the single most concentrated, most all-out barrage the transcendent world had ever unleashed. Even a true god descending from above facing this would probably back away, but I just pushed open the crumbling wooden door of the rental room and walked out slowly. I faced the sky full of world-ending lights suspended in midair. My midnight cloak snapped in the howling wind. The faceless god emblem on my chest seemed to mock the ignorance of everyone watching. On the flagship deck, Sylvia stared hard at my blurred silhouette on the main screen. As an S-rank mental transcendent, the instant she saw me, her mind screamed with death warnings. Beside her stood the military's top fighter, General Lin. General, something is wrong. Sylvia's voice shook. Blood seeped from the corner of her eye. Mental power pushed past its limit. My mental detection can't get within 100 meters of him. How does one person carry both the aura of the spell god from the Arctic tundra and the martial god from the martial pinnacle? General Lin tightened his grip on the legendary sword at his side, the one said to be able to cut mountains in half. He stared hard at the screen. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead. This is impossible. How can one person master two paths to this level simultaneously? But there was no time to think. The barrage was already washing over me like a tsunami. Monster. Ethan laughed like a man unraveling in the command center, but the next second, his laughter cut dead. Against that overwhelming torrent of energy, I didn't even lift an eyelid. I simply raised my right hand and extended one finger. I pressed it gently forward into the boiling void. My lips parted slightly. One word. Break. No earth-shattering explosion. No deafening roar. The instant my fingertip pressed forward, with me at the center, the space within 10 kilometers shattered like a pane of glass hit by a hammer. Black fracture lines spreading in every direction in an instant. My true martial essence had seen through every energy node and every attack. My spell god mental power locked onto the fundamental logic of this space, and the body fused with limitless vitality supplied the raw violence to shatter all of it. Space itself, along with the sky full of mana beams, the 1,000-meter sword energy, the antimatter missiles, and even the 10-direction annihilation array blanketing the city, under my single finger, all of it became fragile paper toys, reduced to primal void particles in an instant. No explosion, because even the energy an explosion would release was swallowed by the fractured space. The world fell into dead silence. What had been a world-ending barrage 1 second left not a single spark the next. The backlash from the formation being forcibly erased made all 18 sect elders vomit blood simultaneously. They fell from the sky like rain. All 12 mechs went offline simultaneously, crashing to the ground trailing black smoke. The massive warfleet was caught in the shockwaves of the shattered space. Over a dozen outer warships disintegrated outright. A sharp crack rang across the flagship deck. General Lin's legendary sword hadn't even come into contact with my attack. It had merely felt the martial pressure contained within that single finger press, and let out a mournful cry before snapping in half. The sword saint dropped to his knees with a thud, eyes vacant, his martial conviction gone. Sylvia pressed both hands over her bleeding eyes, her whole body shaking violently. In that instant of shattering space, she had finally seen the truth beneath the black cloak. Not a person, a perfect law of existence, built from countless deaths and countless reconstructions. Sylvia murmured in despair, her voice saturated with fear. There was never any God's organization. From the very beginning, only one person. What we were hunting is a creature that has already surpassed the dimension of our understanding. Total silence. Ethan collapsed in his command chair, face the color of ash. Those untouchable faction leaders and sect masters, staring at the man suspended in mid-air, who had erased everything they had with a single finger, had lost even the will to run. I slowly lowered my hand. I brushed dust that wasn't there off my cloak. I didn't bother looking at the so-called powerful trembling like insects below. Instead, I looked up, and turned those eyes burning with dark gold fire towards something far above. A deeper gaze in the sky. The stellar observer's cold eyes, invisible to everyone but me, were watching. I looked at the people scattering in terror below, and asked a single calm question. Do you want to know who made this world? My voice was not loud, but carried by spell god mental power. It reached every corner of Jungju clearly, and through the satellite feeds that hadn't yet gone dark, it reached every person on Earth. On the ruins, Ethan sat collapsed on the ground like a beaten dog, trembling as he lifted his head. Sylvia pressed her hands over bleeding eyes, holding back the agony of a mind being torn apart, staring at me. Those once invincible faction rulers, all of them like ducks grabbed by the throat, unable to make a sound. The spiritual energy revival, the ancient ruins, the dungeons. I laughed coldly. I pointed at the massive rift above us, the one my single finger had cracked open to reveal the black vacuum of space. Did you really believe this was nature's gift? A god's blessing? You tore at each other like rabid dogs over scraps inside an S-rank dungeon. You started wars over it. But in the eyes of the ones who actually exist above this dimension, do you know what you are? I paused. My eyes went absolutely cold. You are bacteria in a petri dish, slaughtering each other over a few drops of mutated nutrients. Dead silence. No, this cannot be, General Lin screamed from his knees, voice breaking apart. If the world is just a petri dish, what was our cultivation for? What were thousands of years of martial heritage worth? Data. I destroyed his last illusion without mercy. Every breakthrough you made, every battle you fought, every death you died. All of it, just data uploaded to a higher dimensional universe. The so-called stars are the observers of this petri dish. They seed spiritual energy and dungeons to filter out the highest quality specimens and then harvest them. I raised my hand. The pale blue system panel appeared in my palm, except now it had lost its color entirely, flickering madly in blinding crimson. Alert! Anomalous sample detected. Awakened sample has broken free of baseline logic control. Stellar observer has intervened, initiating world line reset and elimination sequence. And me? I was just a glitch, a dying man who had accidentally slipped through a bug in their test code. I looked at that panel. My finger snapped shut. Crack. The system panel that had been with me for a full year shattered into a rain of light in my one hand. I didn't need it anymore. When all the shadows had become one with me, when my power had reached the ceiling of this dimension, this so-called system had become a chain holding me down. The moment the system shattered, the rift above let out a tearing sound that set teeth on edge. A deep rumble. The entire Earth shook violently. Tsunamis rose into the sky. Volcanoes erupted in unison. Gravity lost all control. As billions of people across the world watched in despair, the black cosmic rift was forced wide open by a pair of invisible hands. Then, an eye appeared behind the rift, vast beyond description, built from countless shining celestial bodies and cold machinery. No pupil, only endless indifference. The moment it looked down at the Earth, a dimensional pressure beyond comprehension crashed down on Jungju. Civilians and S-rank transcendents alike, every single person dropped to their knees without being able to stop themselves. Ethan bled from every opening. Sylvia's mind was on the verge of total collapse. This was the absolute dominance of a higher life form over a lower one. Before it, the Earth was a glass marble that could be crushed at any moment. Anomalous contamination source detected, initiating physical elimination. A vast, emotionless consciousness detonated inside every human mind simultaneously. Then, the great stellar eye began charging a beam of destruction capable of vaporizing the entire solar system in an instant. It's over, all over. Ethan closed his eyes in despair. The apocalypse wasn't zombies, wasn't nuclear war, It was a higher dimensional cleaning operation, but within that pressure that had forced all living things to their knees, I alone floated perfectly straight in midair. I looked up at that eye looking down from above, and suddenly laughed. The laughter grew. It became a roar of madness that shook the sky. I ripped the midnight cloak from my body and revealed that perfect form flowing with dark gold light. A year ago, I lay on a hospital bed reeking of disinfectant waiting to die. Even breathing hurt back then, and I was never afraid. Now I have died 10,000 times, run 10,000 simulations, chewed every piece of suffering and swallowed it whole. You think I'm going to be afraid of you, a voyeur hiding behind the curtain? I flung my arms wide. The dark gold fire in my eyes blazed to its absolute peak. Gods, take your places. At my roar, the space behind me began collapsing across a massive expanse. 1, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. Exactly 10,000 figures in midnight cloaks, the faceless god emblem on every chest, stepped out of the void. They were no longer puppets I had to control. After the system shattered and I claimed full mastery over the laws of existence, I combined the power overflowing inside me with the infinite split ability and replicated 10,000 fully realized shadows, each at 70% of my peak strength. 10,000 spell gods, 10,000 martial monsters, 10,000 extreme assassins. They filled the sky behind me in formation, a legion that had genuinely walked out of myth. Every single shadow's aura alone was enough to suffocate everyone in the so-called god-slaying alliance below. You love to observe, don't you? I raised my right hand, slowly closing it into a fist in the void. All 10,000 shadows made the exact same motion. 10,000 forces, each capable of destroying worlds, resonated in perfect unison. Today, I tear your observation room apart. I vanished in a flash, a dark gold streak that split the fabric of space, leading my 10,000 shadows forward, not retreating but charging, straight into the beam, capable of vaporizing the solar system, hurtling toward the colossal eye above. Two forces. The moment they collided, every sound on Earth ceased. Every source of light was swallowed. In the final second before losing consciousness, Sylvia poured out every last fragment of mental power and saw something she would never forget. The man named Dido threw a single punch. That punch carried the combined force of 10,000 shadows, carried the true martial essence distilled from 10,000 deaths. It shattered the destruction beam and kept going without losing a single step, slamming straight into the stellar eye. Crack! A clean shattering sound rang through the entire solar system. The stellar eye, the embodiment of higher dimensional will, untouchable and absolute, was cracked by that single punch. A fracture spanning tens of millions of kilometers. Golden higher dimensional fluid poured from the fracture like a waterfall. Warning, petri dish shell damaged. Warning, target is breaching dimensional boundary. The stellar eye's mechanical alarm screamed with something that had never been in it before. Fear. I didn't give it a second to repair. I stepped across its shattered crystal, took my shadow legion, and tore the fracture wide open. One step out of the petri dish that had contained us for untold ages. The view changed in an instant. No Earth, no galaxy. I saw massive mechanical fortresses floating in endless void, saw energy pipelines connecting countless petri dishes just like Earth, and deep inside those fortresses, the ones who had always looked down from above, the stellar observers who called themselves gods, were staring through their monitors at me, an intruder who had broken in from below. For the first time, their eyes held none of that cold contempt for lesser creatures. In its place, the kind of bottomless terror a person feels when a demon climbs out of hell. I stood in the void. My shadow legion stretched behind me like a black ocean. I looked at the enormous gate ahead, radiating endless higher dimensional energy. A cruel smile at the corner of my mouth. The game has only just begun. When the stellar observers showed fear for the first time, I had already placed my hand on the door of the higher dimensional universe.